A note to listeners, this podcast episode was recorded on the 21st of December 2020. In this episode, I speak to Dean Brown about how to stop your ego from ruining your life. This conversation discusses quantum physics and how it relates to how we think and perceive. Dean proposes that spiritual connection and awareness allows for willful independence. This is the reason he believes that Mavericks are able to break the patterns of living to others' expectations. Dean also explains that ego is created by us as a protection, but it can stop us from growing and moving from the comfort zone. We also ponder the similarities of the law of attraction and established religious teachings and how the concept of power can change everything. Listen up to the rest of the conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Dean Brown. Hi, Dean.
Hello, how are you?
I am so good today. I'm looking forward to Christmas. What about you?
Well, I'm prepared and I'm ready. And in Canada, we have cold weather, but that's okay. We're used to that here in Canada.
We used to have really mega cold Decembers. It used to be when I was a kid. It was snow, like it used to bet. People would bet to see if it would snow on Christmas Day because snow would be December. Whereas now, that's a good testament for climate change because I can't remember. I think the last time it snowed in December was probably 2-3 years ago, and before that, it was many years ago. So. Yeah, I kind of liked the snow, but only on Christmas Day. Because I was already in the house, so I could look at it.
That's right, yeah. And you weren't necessarily going anywhere on Christmas Day, so it was all good.
All good indeed, yeah. Dean, tell us about you.
Well, I am a high-performance law of attraction coach, and I help professional men and dads get through that part of life that is when they realize that society and school system and all of those things didn't necessarily teach them the things they need to succeed. And I help them deal with that and move past that with spiritual connection, understanding that the ego is not our friend, so to speak, and that our spiritual connection is the most important thing for growth in life.
Interesting. So what is it that we need to succeed then?
We need to be able to live for ourselves. The thing that makes the difference is not living for the external, but living from the internal and being aware of the difference. Wow.
And how do we ensure that we don't become really selfish if we're living for ourselves?
Well, don't forget that self-love is a part of it. We need to be able to love ourselves before we can love others properly. And when we're doing that, we're hopefully doing that with awareness. Yeah. Because if we're not aware of that we're doing that, we're doing it by default, and it's a hit and miss thing. As far as our ego goes, we normally live by what our ego has. Well, we've kind of like created our ego to protect us. And it's based on all those things that we were taught, like I mentioned earlier, by the school system, by our parents, by our friends, by the external stimulus of our environment growing up. So to succeed, you have to be able to discern the difference between what's right for you and what everybody else expects of you.
Yeah, I like that because there are too many people who are living through other people's expectations. And
Absolutely.
as a maverick, that sounds so weird. I mean, it's not, that is just like anti-maverick. So I don't quite understand it. Why do people do that? Why can't they just say, no, this is what I want?
They can, but it's a matter of awareness before they make the choice. If they're not understanding why they're making the choice, then they're not doing it from awareness. They're doing it from default. And that default is the part that trips us up. It's that catch where it's like a catch-22. You think you're doing the right thing because it's what you've been taught all your life, right. But in the meantime, you're not spiritually connected to the truth. You're when you feel these emotions on a daily moment-by-moment basis, and you're experiencing lower vibration emotions. When I say that, I mean, fear, desperation, obsession, even hate and anger. Those are things that are a spiritual signal to let you know that you're on the verge of making a wrong choice, and that choice needs to be brought up to a higher level of awareness in order for you to be spiritually connected and actually manifest that which you need and desire. A lot of people think from a place of want. And the irony is that if they're not thinking from a place of desire and they are thinking from a place of want, they're in a state of believing that it's not available, and yet they're still pursuing it.
So when you're saying spirituality, you're not talking about any deity, are you?
I am talking about the source of life itself, the true self, the true, quantum mechanics has been proven. It's no longer a theory. They've now come to realize that quantum mechanics is what creates life. Now, I have so much experience in this area with respect to theory as well as law. And there's an experiment that was done recently, as a matter of fact, that proves how human beings actually have an influence on the quantum realm just by our presence. And that's before we even enter into a place of conscious thought. So it's actually, see, it sounds complex, but it's actually quite simple. But the catch is back to this awareness and thing. We're born with two things, right? Awareness and choice. And if we don't use our awareness, then we're making choices based on what our external world has taught us rather than what our internal truth is.
That's interesting. I'm trying to reconcile that with how socialized mavericks work. So I define mavericks as willfully independent people.
Absolutely. Now, let me speak to that. Willfully independent, I would like to think or hope, comes from a place of spiritual connection. So you're actually doing it with awareness when you make the choice. So absolutely be willful, be independent, because if you're not, you're living by influence by the external. And that's not where we live our true self, because that's where all the expectations of other people and peer pressure from dead people, for example. You're living what all these, historians and all these other people have shared that is the right way to go. And I'm doing the air quotes thing here, and and it's quite convoluted in all reality, because we've been taught this for so many centuries that a lot of people do not have the awareness to break from that pattern and go into a pattern of the true willful purpose of doing it for yourself, because everybody has a purpose and everybody has a part in the truth of life. And nobody can understand the whole truth, but they can understand their truth. And when you understand your own truth, that leads you directly to your divine purpose. And when I say divine, I don't mean religious, I mean spiritual. And I've had a very, very powerful relationship with my spiritual side that started out as fear of it and a poor recognition of what it really was. And it actually chased me in my dreams when I was younger with a repeating nightmare. And it was trying to connect with me. And I ran from it, not understanding what it was. And as an older person, having been through some real nasty circumstances, I came to a place in my personal development where everything that I was doing was leading me to face it rather than ignore it. And through all these different studies that I was doing, through Joe Dispenza, through Law of Attraction, through Brendan Burchard's High Performance Institute coaching that I was involved in, through all the other coaches that I had, through all my mentors, where they were all teaching me to be truthful to myself. And yet I was running from myself. And it was when I made that connection, it was powerful. It was extremely powerful. And I became one with myself at that point, where I am able to actually make willful choices and pursue them with truth and with actual manifestations that I desire, rather than I create by default.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I can recognize a lot of that, because socialized Mavericks very much are aware of who they are. They live life on purpose.
Absolutely.
And when asked to do something, they are always sense checking that, one, it's for the greater good, and two, it's something that they actually want to do or they think is beneficial. It's not like they're spending a long time thinking about it. It's just so instinctive. It goes through those filters before there's a yes.
Absolutely. And if we're in a place to do that, we can actually become deeper, more deeply aware, and actually search that truth and end up having a greater impact, because now we're doing it from a place of purpose, rather than just a place of that, what you mentioned, where you just go through the filter and then move on. And that brings me to something called the stimulus response gap. And that is a spot in our conscious mind where we're receiving a stimulus, a thought, and we have about 0.6 of a second to respond. And in that time, many of us either put those pre-filters on, or that instinctive thing from the ego, which is our old stories, the things that we were taught from the external, and we do not give ourselves more than that 0.6 to actually be aware of what our choices could be. And we just go ahead and we go with that pre-filter, that external, that ego thought, and there's our decision. Now, if we were to expand that, which is a complete choice on our part, we have the time. There's nothing that says we have to answer or respond instantly. We have all the time in the world, right? And if we take that time and actually choose our responses based on what's true for us, again, we have a greater impact. We desire that which is more we manifest that which is much more of what we desire, rather than what we think is right.
Yeah, interesting. So tell me about ego, because so many people have different definitions for ego. I guess you're thinking of it in terms of the psychology basis.
Absolutely. So I've come to realize that the ego is something that we've created when we were younger, and it's something that's taught. We do choose how it is created, but we're taught to create it. And it's our protection. It's the thing that keeps us where what many people call safe, or in the comfort zone. And it protects us from the risk and from danger and so on and so forth. But it also prevents us from growing because of that protection, because it says to us, oh no, don't do that, or you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that. Meanwhile, it's not necessarily our spiritual truth. It's not necessarily the thing we're supposed to do. It's the thing that's comfortable to do. And there's no growth in the comfort zone, and there's no comfort in the growth zone. And when you come to understand that, then you think to yourself, well, wait a second, I'm thinking about this big promotion, and I'm thinking from a place of fear or trepidation or reluctance, or I'm happy where I am. I know what I'm doing where I am. I'm not going to go for that promotion because I won't know what to do completely, or I'll be in with a bunch of different people, or as a team leader, you're in a place where, okay, I'm supposed to be helping develop this new project, but I don't really want to, because it'll all be new, and I know I won't necessarily know what to do. So the ego is like an enemy pretending to be a friend in a lot of cases because of that.
That might explain some of the differences between Mavericks and Conformists, because Mavericks tend to have really high self-efficacy, and they believe that they'll cope with whatever. So right. It's just like, yeah, if I get it, oh, that's fine. If I don't get it, that's fine too, because whatever happens, I'm going to be all right.
And that's when you're falling back on the simple fact that you know who you are.
Yeah.
and you know what you won't accept.
Yes.
Right. And you're not willing to accept those things that hold you back just from an ego standpoint, because you think to yourself, and there's no way I'm not putting up with that person telling me I can or can't do such and such. And the power of that, if you're in a place to do that, and then add the spiritual awareness of how and why you're doing that, you can have a great impact.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've had this conversation before where I say that Mavericks loan other people authority over them. So they're quite prepared to accept someone else's authority up until the point that it no longer makes sense, because either that you don't trust them or they're telling you something stupid. And then you go, no, okay, I'm taking it back now. I don't care if some hierarchy says that you're in charge. If I think this is against my ethical standing or my principles, then we move no further. That's it.
That's
We're
right.
done.
That's right. And I had a very powerful experience with that just recently, when the COVID was taking place earlier in the year, and I was employed in a corporate location as a security supervisor for the federal government, and they were choosing what we were going to do as protocols, and of course the orders were coming down from higher up, and my immediate superior said, here, with a delivery, is enough masks, gloves, and disinfectant to last you for 2 days. Make it last for 7.
Wow.
And for me, being a supervisor and having a small team, 2 of which were in their 70s, knowing that this was a risk that was just unacceptable, I said, well, no, I won't further that. I will not accept that order. I will use my own money to buy more materials and make sure that we all have enough to get us through. Well, again, that's against policy, my supervisor said. And I just said, well, then you're going to have to fire me, because I'm not going to accept that. You're either going to have to step back and just let me do this, or you're going to have to find someone else to follow your orders, because that's against my honor, that's against my integrity, and I won't accept it.
There you go. You must be a maverick. Because Mavericks don't hesitate to have. I mean, I can think of at least 2 or 3 corporate jobs I've been in that situation where I've said, nope, if you want me to do this, you're going to have to fire me, because it's wrong. I'm not doing it.
Exactly.
And to a man, they always say, all right then, because they know, isn't it? Know. And I suppose you give them the excuse for them to, because maybe they don't want to do it anyway, but by you refusing, you give them the excuse to go to their managers to say, well, he or she won't do it. So, do you know what I mean?
That's
so
right.
Maybe you give the authority. So how do you stop your ego from ruining your life?
Well, it has to come, again, we've fallen back on awareness and choice. We have to be, when we make our choices, we have to be aware of where those choices are coming from. And in that awareness, back to the stimulus response gap now, there's something within there called the growth edge. And the growth edge is all tied up in your response time, the amount of time between your response and your stimulus and your response. Now, that growth edge is where your ego steps in and says, oh, dude, this is going to be this, or this is going to be that, or you need to do this, or you don't need to do that, and blah, blah. And in order to get around that and make the choices that you need to make to move forward, you have to fall back on the awareness of who you truly are. Now, I mentioned a moment ago how I knew right away that this was not something I was going to allow to happen, and to put the ego aside and take that spiritual stance. For me, it was a spiritual thing. It was not an ego thing. It was because I knew it was wrong. And that oftentimes the ego isn't there to protect others. It's there to protect you. And it wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting my team. So I would imagine the military has something to do with, my father was a World War II fighter pilot. So I would imagine I get some of that structure from what he taught me. But at the same point in time, when we make that choice, we have to be aware of why we're making it. And in order to do that correctly, we have to stay true to ourselves. It's as simple as that.
Oh, thank you for that. I know you said that you are a law of attraction coach as well.
Correct.
And I remember when it kind of, years ago now, where it kind of like became more mainstream.
Yes.
And then sometime after that, there were lots of gurus that were saying, No. You've missed the point. It's not just manifesting and thinking about stuff. You have to do stuff too.
That's correct.
Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And I think because that message came sometime after, I think that's lost. So, like you meet people. Like often, I meet people who are law of attraction, but they don't emphasize any doing of anything. It's just almost like, because you remember that video that came out years ago that started talking about law of attraction, and it was all very much about manifesting your thing, but it wasn't, it didn't go into you have to then do something. So I seem to remember there was this one clip where I think somebody wanted money, and then the postman came and all these envelopes something like that, and I think that's kind of stuck. So what does it mean to you, and how does it work in relation to high performance?
So the whole, you hit the nail on the head there, Judith. The truth of it is that we do have to make action. We do have to make action, but we have to do it from a place of awareness and choice, falling back on the awareness and choice again. So that there's several laws that are involved with the overall law of attraction. The first one is, as you mentioned, the law of manifestation. And it's about a conscious choice. Right? And from there, we fall into the law of magnetism. So where we have made that choice and we're expanding our energy frequency out into the universe, out into the world. And when we do that, that gives us the opportunity for us to receive back that energy that we've put out. But it has to come from a place of pure desire. We have to be aware that what we desire is the basis for that broadcast, that energy broadcast. So in that, we have to be aware of the paradox where if we're thinking one thing and doing another, we're canceling out our manifestation, because it's all about having a balance. It's all about being in a place where you can be aware of what your choices are from that spiritual place and choose to, well, first of all, it starts with a thought. And then you have a feeling based or in respect of that thought. And then you say things based on your feelings. And then after you've said it, you've got to do something. You can't just sit on the couch. You've got to make actions, right? You got to get up and do something. And the whole catch that people seem to forget is they're just going to have that thought and sit on the couch and wait for the doorbells to ring, right? And that's where you miss. And that's where a lot of people are working against themselves when it comes to that manifestation. You have to, now, when you're working with the law of attraction, you're choosing to have the universe as your partner. And you're choosing to let the universe do its thing when you put that energy broadcast out there, that frequency of this is what I desire, this is how I desire it. But when you put it in a box, now you've reduced the possibility of it returning to you to be manifested based on the definitions of that box. So you got to come into a place of harmony, of understanding that the universe is connected to us. We are connected to the universe. And it falls back on that scientific experiment I mentioned earlier, where we are in a place where our mere presence has an effect on the quantum field. Quickly now, that the experiment was they put a vacuum in a vessel, and they looked for the quantum particles, and they found them in a random state. And they wanted to know what would it take to have an effect of structure on that random state? And they put in human DNA in the vessel. And instantly those quantum particles assumed the DNA pattern of the human molecules instantly. So right there is scientific proof that we just have to be there to have an effect, but we have to make choices in order to define what that structure is going to be. And in those decisions, we have to take actions. And those actions have to align with everything that we think, feel, and say. So you have to do what you can with what you have at the time. And if you do nothing, you get nothing. And that's the thing. I mean, when you go to work, if you do something through the day, then you're going to cause an effect. But when you're working with the law of attraction, if you do nothing, you've caused the effect of nothing. Does that make sense? Right?
That's really such a basic way of looking at it, and it makes me laugh because it's so obvious, isn't it? If you're manifesting nothing, you're going to get nothing. It's kind of obvious, really, when you think about it like that.
And it's truly obvious, because the whole point it falls back on that spiritual awareness. If you desire it, well, let me back up. If you want it, you already believe that it can't happen, and you'll never get it, because then you're going to get obsessed about when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. And that vibration eliminates it instantly. You know how if you take a vibration and add a second similar vibration, it strengthens it. But if you take a vibration, like when I say a vibration, I mean a frequency, and you add a different one that's totally different, then they cancel each other out and there's nothing, right? This is scientifically proven. And so when you consider that as how you manifest, then everything has to be in harmony, and you have to consider right action, conscientious action when you're doing it. You have to be willing or understanding that it's how you treat others and the power that has to attract others. So when you say such and such based on how you think and feel, it has to be in alignment with how you're thinking and feeling. As a matter of fact, that feeling has to be in alignment with what you're thinking, and it all falls into place. If you throw in a different vibration, you cancel everything out and you get nothing.
So can I just ask a question, because I'm just thinking what you're saying. So is that why when Maverick says, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay, that is the case because they believe that strongly and they act as if everything's going to be okay, so therefore everything is okay? Is that what you mean?
It is, and that is the basic principle. Yes.
So another thing is, like, if I'm designing a course, say, or a program, I tend to do the research one day, and then I go to myself, all right, tomorrow I'll just go, or whatever I've scheduled to then actually design the thing. But I'm confident that I know that, say I don't know, I have to design something that at this current moment I don't know anything about, but I am confident that by the time I have to deliver it, I will be an expert in it.
That's absolutely true.
But I do something about it. I don't just imagine it. Then I go and do a hell of a lot of research and hypotheses and checking, and then by the time I do come to deliver this thing, I know an awful lot about it. But I never doubted that I wouldn't be at that point.
And it's the actions you take in the meantime, of course, as well, because you're going to be taking action with that purpose in mind, with that awareness in mind, right? So you're actually you're not just researching it, because we can get into a place of self-paralysis. It's called analysis paralysis, where we're just thinking about it and we're not doing it. But if you're actually taking action based on that research, on that analysis, and you're working in a place of belief, so if you have unshakable belief that what you're doing is right and will create something, then that's how Edison created the light bulb. Right? He knew, even though he did it 1,000 ways wrong, he knew he was working closer and closer and closer to that which would work and be a real thing. That's how your cell phone became a cell phone, right?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What about so a lot of the things that you say about law of attraction could be interpreted by someone who follows a deity, that's what happens. So, like, putting it out to the universe could be no different from praying, for example.
Absolutely. And having
that belief could be faith. Do you see what I mean? It's
100%. 100%. And the irony is that if you consider the Christian scriptures, now this is the only religion that I've studied, even though I do know certain things about other religions with respect to being in alignment for the most part of Christianity, there's scriptures in the Bible that actually teach the law of attraction. They don't call it the law of attraction, but those realities are there. And it's amazing if you consider it. Now, why is it that those things are there? So, for example, here's a quote from Matthew 7:8. For everyone who asks receives, he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be opened.
So isn't it the other way around then? Isn't the law of attraction just taking Christian principles and actually living those?
Well, you could argue that. The thing is that the Bible, I don't want to get into a religious conversation.
No, I'm just curious. Sorry, I'm just following my curiosity now.
Sure. So the catch becomes the inclusion of judgment.
Okay.
Anytime you include judgment, you've stopped being spiritual, because spiritual love is pure. It holds no judgment. It holds no punishment. And you have to keep that in mind as you go through this research or
Okay.
the thought pattern. If you're going somewhere where that's going to include judgment, now you're not being true to yourself. You're not being true to spiritual love, because now you're judging that it is this and it's not that.
I understand, because it's interesting, because you mentioned Christian scripture, and if you actually, if not saying you singular, you plural, looks at scriptures, then it would be exactly what you said. There is no judgment for the human. So it's very, that's why I'm sort of saying it's similar. It's just that the way that people have interpreted it,
there we go,
has put judgment on it. But then if you say you read Mark, Matthew, whatever, it's not what it says. It doesn't say then judge these people. In fact, it's the complete opposite, isn't it? So that's why I was saying it's a bit like a lot of these things where they talk about the universe or chi or ki or all those kind of things, all sound in my ears the same as a Christian belief, if you take the judgment stuff out of it. It's just that rather than saying the universe, someone says God. But but the words, you wouldn't you could go into a church and say what you say, and people would assume you was talking about Christianity. And that may be the same for other religions. I don't know. But I suspect because they're universal truths, then there must be lots of comparisons out there. That just seems to be logical in my mind.
The beautiful thing is that man isn't able to understand all of it, the whole picture. So he chose to define it. And in that definition, he was allowed to include the judgment. And if we can expand our definition, our understanding, our belief, our faith, and to just accept what it is rather than trying to explain it.
See, it's just sorry, I don't mean but that's it. It's just, it's not, I don't know, because I don't think man has been like this in the past. It's only like more modern man where we want to understand and control stuff, isn't it? Because I think in the past, we just accepted, didn't it? Like the sun comes up, okay, Whereas I think, we don't really need to hold on to the reasons of things that are true, isn't it? So it's a bit like, why argue about Reiki or hypnosis or law of attraction or any of these things if for those individuals they work? I mean, it seems a bit of a nonsense. It's like, or faith, whichever faith that happens to be, if that person is living a life that works for them and for others, nobody else is fit to judge. It's like, it's not like you're hurting somebody, but if you live a life where you believe law of attraction, this is just like for instance, is better than name X religion, but there's two people and they're both doing the same thing and it's both working, it isn't really anybody else's business, is it?
Not really, no. But you bring up the point, though, where man has just, you mentioned that a few moments ago, where man has just recently. Now, you're not including ancient mystics and meditation when you say that. And this is a principle that has been attempted to be taught by those ancient mystics back 5,000-6,000 years ago, where they taught this because they understood it, but not from a definition.
Or indigenous people anywhere in the world.
That's right.
It's because they're, living in harmony with the land.
There it is.
And understanding these, beliefs in a way that we as modern individuals are only trying to learn now, isn't it? If you think about, I don't know, acupuncture, how many thousands of years, how old is that? Do you know? And it's like, it's only relatively recently we're like, this is really good, this acupuncture, it's amazing. Right. Whereas obviously the Chinese have been doing it for thousands of years. Right. But it's, I guess I think that's, I don't know, I think maybe as the world gets more complicated, we want to control more because we will find it less scary, maybe. Like when the world was a lot more simpler, you didn't have to control as much, did you?
Absolutely true. And of course, we receive so much information these days that we have to do a lot more filtering, right?
Yeah.
So that filtering is part of where our spiritual awareness can help us find the real truth rather than the propaganda truth. And so that, that takes us to COVID now. What is the truth? Where is the reality of what we're, right? What are we dealing with? What is it that's right for not just me, but everybody? And how, there's numbers that prove this, and there's numbers that prove that. There's information, there's misinformation, there's disinformation. There's people that don't know what they're talking about that are saying stuff. There's people that know what they're talking about that are saying the opposite.
I was thinking about this the other day, actually, because it was when COVID first started, or first people started talking about it, it was a lot easier to get, like, nobody knows what's going on. Right? So people accepted that there were lots of different opinions, but now people believe it's scientifically determined whether it's real or not real, wherever you stand on it.
Yeah,
they now become belief systems, don't they? And it stopped people from actually being objective and going through that, that assessment of what you believe. But it's not just COVID, is it? It's like anything, isn't it? Once people have made a decision, they don't like to change their mind on that decision because that decision becomes their identity. So therefore, to change the decision means that you have to change who you are. Whereas I think socialized Mavericks make decisions, but those decisions aren't who they are. So, so if somebody suddenly came up to me, if you came up to me now and said, look, here's all the evidence of law of attraction, and this can be scientifically proven, or even if not scientifically proven, but it can be proven through anecdotal evidence or whatever, and I've gone from my own internal checklist and I'd go, okay, there may be more to this than I thought before. I'd do some research, but I wouldn't go, you're a loony bin, because I'm curious as to say, okay, tell me why you believe that, and I can then go off and do my research and come back and ask you some questions. But that's an openness.
Absolutely, and being aware, or at least choosing to be aware that you don't know everything is the first step, and having that curiosity over having the fear is key. Right? Be curious, don't be afraid.
Yeah, I guess because socialized Mavericks don't fear being wrong or the truth, but they fear being stupid. So therefore they will do the research so they're not stupid. And if somebody says, because stupidity is like if somebody gives you a rational explanation for something and it becomes the truth, it is stupid to stick to something that's against that. Absolutely. That would be stupid. There's a bit different from being ignorant. I don't know what you mean. It's different from saying, I understand what you're saying. I can see it's true, but I'm sticking to my old opinion because
that's right.
Yeah, that is stupidity.
It is. That's like the wife that bitches at the husband for 20 years expecting something to change, right?
Or the other way around.
Or the other way around, yeah. Someone doing something, and just, doing the same thing over and over and again and expecting a different result. Right.
Yeah, so. And I think as well, socialized Mavericks tend to, as part of the decision-making process, they actively look out for people who disagree with them to test what they think. So if they're then convinced from the person that disagrees, or the people that disagree, or the research that disagrees, then they'll go, fine, I was wrong. That's but they don't look. So socialized Mavericks are strange in that way because they don't look for confirmation. They look for people. They look for things that don't confirm. And if they've done all that and they still believe, they're like, okay, I'm certain now that I'm right. But they will actively go looking for someone who disagrees and say, right, tell me why. And then they convince me. Open mind here, blank piece of paper.
Absolutely.
Tell me why you're right.
The difference between that is spiritual awareness. When you go to the meditation and the inner awareness to find your truth, as opposed to you're like, sure enough, go to YouTube or ask other people for your research purposes to get that other opinion, but that other opinion doesn't necessarily hold the truth. So for me, I always like to fall back on my own spirituality, because the spirit does know everything. There's nothing that has happened or will happen that the spirit isn't aware of.
You think so? Or do you think you just get better at it because you practice it more?
Well, no, it's because if I give myself the opportunity to be connected, not to my ego, where all the patterns and stories are, but to my spirit, where all the truth is, because I've already been through this thing of avoiding the spiritual and the truth that's within it. I know that the truth is there, because as soon as I connected to it, everything started falling into place without me having to change anything but my belief.
But what about those that have damaged spirits because something has happened or they have been raised in a certain way, they can't connect back to that, can they?
Well, the thing is that it's not a damaged spirit, it's a damaged self. And the connection is broken. And the truth within that connection is skewed to believing that they're broken. But nobody is truly broken if they're connected to their spirit. The spirit heals everything. And it might leave you may have, a physical condition, like, for example, terminal cancer. That's your body that's broken. It's not necessarily your spirit.
Yeah, but I'm just sort of thinking people that have gone through some form of trauma that has manifested its way into those kind of brain patterns where, I don't know, you don't think you're worthy or whatever that happens to be. How do those individuals connect then to a loving spirit that is always right? How does that work?
Well, you're talking to someone that is a 2-time suicide attempter because of losing everything and choosing the wrong things through ego. So I can speak directly to that through personal experience. And what happened was I was taught by my father, by society, by my family, from a very, very old school, shun the spiritual approach. And I put myself through so much trying to follow their patterns. And getting into a place where I was successful, but I was miserable. And it was one of those where I was on the verge of, I actually attempted suicide twice because of it. And on the first time, a person showed up to help me that I'd never met before, that I'd never seen before. And I was delivered from that act. The second time, I made a choice that I was going to go where no one could find me, but I needed to say goodbye to my children first. And the universe made it so that one of my children wasn't available to say goodbye to. And that is, again, I could never have predicted that. I could never have, expected that to happen. I just thought, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how it's going to turn out, and then it's going to be over. And yet the universe, in its infinite knowledge and infinite wisdom, found a way to conspire to change what I was going to do, to teach me the lesson that I was, wait a second, all this time, I was wrong. And I spent 20 years in abject hate because when I was 3, my dad sent my mother away because she was an alcoholic. My dad owned a hotel in a small town, and being the mayor and she being the mayor's wife, she could do what she wanted. And she chose to drink heavily. She drank every day that I was in her womb, and I don't have fetal alcohol syndrome. And when I was made aware of the fact that the person in that video that I'm watching for the first time is the lady that's not on the couch, then who is the lady in the video? Oh, that's your mother. Well, then who the hell is the lady on the couch? That's not your mother. And yet in the meantime, I had been raised to believe that the lady on the couch was my mother. And I went through I became very, very destructive at that point because I felt totally betrayed.
Yeah.
And in that, I went through decades of expressing hatred, which I thought was the opposite of love. Meanwhile, the opposite of love is self-love. So I made all these choices based on emotion and what I was taught to be totally wrong. And I went forward for decades doing it totally wrong. And so this is the definition of what you're talking about when you mentioned that a few moments ago. And I was able to learn that I have a purpose. There's a need for me to be here, because now that I've gone through that, my understanding is the deepest that it can get, because it went right down to my spiritual level. And I now have a connection to that where the truth is. And I can't be shaken from that truth, because it's the simple fact that it's the truth. And the truth is indestructible. There is nothing that can destroy the truth, because it is what it is. If you embrace it fully, you are then indestructible and cannot be shaken. And that's the power that I've discovered for myself. And I love the fact that it always seems to come to that. It doesn't matter what I speak, what I say, what I feel, or what I think. It always comes back to that truth.
Well, I'm pleased you're still here, Dean.
Thank you. So am I.
and you've managed to find your way back. That's fantastic. And thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
No, thank you.
You did say something that's I'm curious with before we end, though. When you said opposite of love is self-love, you can't leave without explaining that now.
So absolutely. So when we love somebody, That's an external thing. When we love ice cream, or we love Judith, or I love my kids. That's an external expression. And the opposite of that is going on the inside, where you are, and where there's nothing but you. And that is where the true love starts, is self-love. Is if you can't love yourself, then you have no way how to love someone else properly. There's always going to be some sort of judgment. There's always going to be some sort of ego in there that's going to taint that love, and it won't be pure. And the only place to find pure love is with your connection to the spirit, which comes from the inside.
Yeah, I can definitely get behind that, because people that hurt people. And I think you do need to love yourself before you can love somebody else, for sure. But I don't see how that's the opposite of love, though.
Well, a lot of people struggle with that because they feel that love, well, first of all, they don't understand what love is to start with, in many cases. I'm not saying that's your circumstance. I'm just saying that we all are always confused about this until we are able to face the truth of what it is. And the search for that truth is the journey to self-love. Are you able to say to yourself that I absolutely love everything I am, including the bad parts?
Personally, I can, yeah.
Right.
But then I've done my own journey, right? So,
Absolutely. But this is the beauty of that, is that when we are able to seek that from a perspective of truth, of who we are, and accept everything that we have in ourselves, everything that we think, everything that we do, that is a tough thing to love in many, many cases, because you have to reiterate it every day, all day. There's going to be places where we come from our integrity, from our purpose, from our desires, that sometimes we have thoughts where, like, wait a second, what are you doing thinking that? And that's where, if you don't love yourself, you're going to automatically ping pong into the wrong direction, because you don't love yourself, right?
I think I could get behind the beginning of love is self-love, but I don't think I can get behind it being the opposite, because it doesn't quite gel for me. Not saying, for me,
that's okay.
I don't think that kind of works. But I think it's interesting what you're saying, because with socialized Mavericks, other people's opinions of them is interesting, but it doesn't change who you are. So if somebody says you're fat, but you think you're okay, or you think, I am fat, it doesn't really. It's not me, though. Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't really matter. Or if somebody says that's a good job, but you think it's not a good job, then that opinion isn't really that important. But if they say it's a bad job, but you think it's a good job, then that, other people's opinions is interesting feedback, but it doesn't affect you as an individual.
Unless you choose for it to. If you choose for it to, it can.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, generally speaking, socialized Mavericks don't make that choice. So other people's, it's almost like other people's opinions are interesting feedback for you to grow and learn, but it doesn't change me. Like, my identity is not wrapped up in somebody else's opinion.
No.
I might be hurt because they say, you're fat or you're ugly or something. You might be like, I don't like that. But it's still not going to make me a different person, if you see what I mean.
Yes, no, I understand that 100%. Now, the one thing that I did grasp as my belief when I first went through this initial trauma was that I was supposed to have been loved by my dad, and I was betrayed by him. So the opposite of love for me at that time was hate. And I spent 20 years in extreme hate, drugs, crime, hurting other people physically, mentally, any way I could through hate. And I lived a life of hate for 20 plus years. And that's where it started to catch up to me and started to cost me, because as much as I thought I loved my wife, there was hate there because of what happened with my mother. As much as I tried to love my kids, there was hate there because of what they forced me to have to do for myself. As much as I thought I loved my job, there was hate there because of how I had to do my job, the things that I was forced to do to keep my job. So that opposite, or that perception of the opposite of love, was one of the things that drove me to find that the opposite of love is self-love, not what I mean. That may make me ask you, what do you think the opposite of love is?
Indifference.
Indifference.
Because if you don't care, because I'm talking about an external, because, you know, if you're indifferent to it, you have no emotion one way or the other. And I think that's, at least if you hate something, you're emotionally invested in it. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So like if you hate something, you could change your mind and love that thing, couldn't you? Because you are invested in that thing. Whereas I think if you're indifferent to it, it doesn't really matter what happens. That person can live or die, or something could happen or not happen. But so what? If you're indifferent to it, I think that's worse than hating it. I think.
I would suggest that maybe you're choosing to not understand. Right? Because if you're indifferent to something, then you're choosing to not understand what that thing is. Meanwhile, if you were to come to an understanding of it, you might find that it has value for you.
Yeah.
Right? Interesting. Very, very interesting.
Interesting. So, Dean, would you come back another time if we found something else to talk about?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to speak with you again, Judith, and on any subject.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to say before we finish?
I want to encourage everybody out there to find their true self, find their spiritual truth, and live it. If you're living in fear is external evidence appearing real, and there is no basis for it other than your own belief. You make it stronger by believing in it. So just find someone that you can learn from, find a mentor, find a coach, find someone that can help you get to the place where you can be more you.
Thank you. And I think that's a good point. As a Maverick, I will definitely get behind. You need to be self-aware, and what do you say? Awareness and choice. They could almost be the watchwords for Mavericks, actually. Be aware of what you're doing, what you're thinking, how you're acting. Absolutely. And make a conscious choice to do or not do, I think. As Yoda says, there is no try.
There's only do. There is only do. I love Yoda.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Dean as much as I enjoyed having it. At the Maverick Paradox, we improve your impact and influence by enabling you to effectively strategize, innovate, and execute. So to find out more, contact us at judith@maverickparadox.com. Thank you. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. Finally, if you would like to work with us or are interested in the Maverick at work, check out maverickparadox.co.uk.